Imagine having a volunteer on your team who schedules the band each and every month so that you don't have to. You don't have to even think about it. Imagine another volunteer that you have who gets all the files ready for Planning Center, uploads them, sends notes to the band, and then another volunteer who builds your track software, your set for the week. And then imagine a team of volunteers whose job it is to check up on different team members on your team, disciple them, encourage them, see how they're doing spiritually. Imagine another volunteer leader in charge of all your vocalists and who is running them through workouts and warm-ups and taking them backstage to make sure they sound good. And imagine that none of them are paid, and yet they gladly and faithfully do it as a volunteer. Now, our guest today will show us that not only is this possible, but this is preferred. This is exactly what God commands us to do as leaders. And so I'm excited to bring our guest, Mike, on the screen to show us how he's built a completely volunteer leadership team at his church and help us do the same. And so everybody, please welcome Mike. Say hello, Mike.
Hey guys, how's it going?
So Mike, I wanted to do this conversation with you because there is nobody that I know that's better than you at raising up leaders on your team to actually do real work for you consistently. And I remember we did a little teaching together in the academy recently, and one of the people on the call were like, well, what am I supposed to do all day? And don't worry, guys, we'll get into that because you will still stay busy even if you delegate a lot of your leadership to others. But Mike, I want you to tell us some of the positions that you've raised up at your church, like full on volunteer positions, but major leadership. So yeah, let us know.
I looked at it in 4 categories. And so the volunteer leadership team, I have the worship leader roles, I have band and vocal, I have production leadership roles, and then culture leadership roles. And so the first thing is my music director, MD, is a volunteer role. I also have a vocal director overseeing all of the vocal leaders. I have production director overseeing the audio, the lighting, and the cameras, and then also communications and events person. This was something that I'm not good at. And so I looked for a weakness and found someone who had a strength, and they do that. And then also onboarding and also training director as well.
Guys, all of those positions he just listed are volunteers. So if your mind is going, how did you do that, Mike? I need volunteers like that who will help. Mike is going to teach us how to do that. I will also say this has been a journey. He is on his 6th or 7th rotation of leaders, and I'm sure each time he's gotten better at developing and equipping and recruiting the right kind of people and setting them up for success. So we'll dig into that as well today. But I just want you guys to start to think bigger about your job as the worship leader. It's not to do everything yourself. It's to equip others and recruit others and invite others into the system that you're building so that they can find their place in that system and do the work for you and with you. So let me just recap those positions that are all volunteers. You have music director volunteer, you have tech director volunteer, you have vocal director volunteer, you have onboarding volunteer, you have like pastoral care volunteers. I think you call them the circle or something like that. And then you have an event coordinator director volunteer. Okay, guys. So wow, that's crazy, Mike. And we'll give you guys some first steps that you can take later on in this conversation, because it can feel overwhelming when you're like, oh my gosh, how can I get to the place Mike is? Well, we'll give you some basic first steps here in a bit. And I should also say this before I ask you this question. Underneath all of those directors that are volunteers, Mike has other leaders underneath them that do specific things, and they're also volunteers. So it's like a whole volunteer pyramid. It's like a Ponzi scheme, Mike. No, I'm just kidding.
It kind of is. I do. And it's important to understand that, because you're like, man, how does an MD handle so much? Because he has other MDs underneath him, right? We call them band leaders, essentially. How does the vocal director do it? Well, she has 4 or 5 different vocal leaders underneath her, right? How does this onboarding and training? Well, she has a team that she has as well of 3 or 4 people that are coaches and things like that. So that's how this is all sustained.
And Mike, people are probably wondering, well, what do you do all day, Mike? There's this thought that I have is, as you have delegated authority and responsibility to all these people, you're not probably aware of all the micro details anymore. And I was thinking about this phrase. I think I've heard Craig Rochelle say it. Maybe, I don't know who said it, but they said you can have control or you can have growth, but you can't have both. And so it's kind of like you had to let go, you had to find people, train people, and then let go. And then now your ministry is just like flourishing and blossoming. So, but just tell the worship leader, like, if you're not doing all the scheduling, if you're not doing all the onboarding, if you're not doing all the vocal stuff and putting the resources in planning center and making the track software, what does Mike do then? What does your week look like? And maybe help us get a vision for what our week could look like.
Well, it looks different, right, for every single person, whether if you're full time or you're part time, or maybe you're a volunteer yourself. I think for me specifically, I've stepped into I'm the executive pastor of worship and creative arts. So I oversee a staff, creative staff, and my assistant, and all those sort of things like that. So in that realm, I have a lot more to do than I did before, even when I was worship pastor. So for me to jump up to the level where God wanted to take me, I had to put all of these things in place. And I had to finally like relinquish that control, because that's one of the hardest things. And so what I get to do now on the worship team is I get to disciple people. I get to disciple all of the music director, the vocal director, all of the leaders, the worship leaders. I get to disciple all of those people, meeting with them for coffee, for lunches, and not really having to be in the weeds of every single decision. It's so freeing to know that my music director is going to handle the scheduling for March and April and all of those things. And then he comes to me, he sends me a copy and says, "Hey, what do you think?" And I say, "Well, okay, I like this. Would change this. Okay, great. Send it out." And it's so freeing to be able to have that. So yes, I still do a ton of things within my role, but it's more about now being able to not be in the weeds and be able to have more relationship with people, which is really what it's all about.
Yeah, it's interesting. You kind of elevate yourself out of the day to day doing all these little tasks. So you can now, like you said, you're the executive pastor at your church. It's like you've elevated up. As you give away authority to others, you're actually freed up to move upward to higher leverage activities or more relational stuff or whatever it is you guys want to do. For those of you watching or listening, it's like, what do you want to do more of? Do you want to do more songwriting? Do you want to do more creative stuff? Do you want to do more stage design stuff? Well, if you can elevate yourself out of the day-to-day weeds stuff and find some capable, qualified, faithful, and which we'll talk about how, volunteers to do those things for you, then you're freed up to do that stuff that you desire to do. So, Mike, I always like to start with why. Why should we, and we've kind of covered some of it, why should we start to think this way, that I need to begin looking for others to help me lead my ministry? Why should we start thinking? It could be biblical, it could be practical, it could be both.
When ministry depends on one person, you're in a mindset of addition, not multiplication. You can't be in a mindset of multiplying. I actually read in my devotion this morning that there are some things that God wants to do, but you are so stuck in addition that you don't have a multiplication mindset. Like, it can't be sustainable. Like, that you cannot sustain leadership culture. You cannot sustain your ministry without multiplying yourself and multiplying leaders. And what's going to happen? Burnout's going to happen to you, right? Maybe you've got one person on your staff, or maybe you've got one person on your team. That person's going to get burnout. You're going to limit growth. Like, everything runs through one person. Your ministry is just going to plateau. It really is. Your volunteers, like, one of the most important questions that I was asked was, is there an opportunity for me to grow? Is there an opportunity for me to grow in my leadership? And I was like, I've never even told them that I would love to have people in leadership early on. Early on, I was like, wow, I've never even told them I would love for you to be a part of this. And so volunteers start to disengage a little bit because they feel like they're just like replaceable workers and not invested leaders. But when you start thinking this way, people start stepping into gifts that they didn't even know they had, gifts that you didn't know they had. They start to take ownership of the ministry. And it's again about releasing that control. Your ministry starts running smoothly. Like, even when the worship pastor isn't there, I'm going to be gone. I have a month sabbatical this year. This is the first time I get a month. And I'm not worried because I know that my team's going to be able to handle everything. And then also, I think that pipeline for future leaders. right? It ensures the longevity of your ministry. It also ensures the legacy of when you're not there anymore, you don't leave a ministry that's in shambles. I don't know about you if you've ever jumped ship from a ministry to another ministry, or maybe you've been called to another ministry and you get there and you're like, whoa, this thing did not run smoothly at all. I want, when my time is done at Bloom Church in Branson, Missouri, as the worship pastor, I want to be able to hand it off and have systems, processes, and be able to, like, here is a ministry that is ready to go for you. All you've got to do is follow the guidelines of this. That's why I think we have to start thinking this way.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so healthy. And I think you mentioned something that I think most of us haven't thought of, which is people actually want to do more. They're asking you, is there a way for me to grow here? Is there something for me to grow into? And you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even tell them that there is something for them to grow into.
Yep.
So yeah, I think people on our team, many of them are busy. They got families, they got jobs, but there are some on our teams that they're like, I want more. I want to do more. I want to be involved. I want to have a mission and a purpose. Everybody wants to feel like they belong and that they're a part of something. And I think letting them know that there is something that you can call them into is exciting for people. And I think it's important for all of us to shift our mindset that it's not your job to do it, dear worship leader. It's not your job to do it. It's your job to make sure it gets done. There's a big difference. So does that make sense? It's not your job to do it. It's your job to make sure it gets done. It doesn't have to
ultimately,
be you.
right. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it's about you are the one that are responsible for that task. You're the one who gets talked to in a staff meeting, not the person who didn't do it. You're the ultimately one who gets talked to about it.
Right. And so that should set you free to be like, okay, I don't have to be the one to schedule my team. I can train someone else to do it. I don't have to be the one to build the tracks. Maybe there's someone on my team who's really geeky and into music and they want to do it. So hopefully that sets some of you free to start thinking like, what are some of the things I can release? Our job as leaders is to figure out, to build the system and find the right people to run the different pieces of the system so that it runs smoothly. But we don't have to run every piece ourselves. We just have to see the vision for like, okay, I need this, I need this, I need this. It should probably be done like this. Who could do that? Okay, this person can do that. And our job is to kind of be the CEO of the company, so to speak, of our ministries, right? And I know maybe we're speaking like in terms that you've never thought of before, but I just want you guys to start to realize like, I can be free from this. I'm thinking about like, for example, one of the wonderful people watching live is Sunny, and she's a comm director at her church, and she's the worship director, and she's a mom of 2 toddlers, and she's busy and stressed. But maybe we can start to teach Sunny and others like her that like, think about who you can delegate and offload to and raise up. And it's not just that you're using people, you're actually giving people a purpose. And I think there's a difference, and Mike's going to get into that in just a second. If you guys are curious about some of the things that Mike's team does, we will have some job descriptions posted for you. But one interview that I did with Mike a year ago was specifically about his music director role and all of the details that go into that. And so I will make sure to, in the Academy, link that for you, or if someone's watching later on YouTube, to link that below this video. But you can watch Mike discuss all the different things that his music director is responsible for and how they've structured that role. But let's talk about identifying people, Mike. How did you find these people? How did you identify these people? If you're feeling stuck, mediocre, or inadequate in your ministry, if you know there must be a better way of doing things, but you're not sure how, if you're looking for fresh inspiration and new ideas that will improve your ministry and give you a team that you're proud of leading, then I invite you to join me and over 1,400 worship leaders from all over the world who are growing inside the Worship Ministry Training Academy. Our C3 format is proven to get you results because you get courses, coaching, and community. The courses teach you what to do, the coaches help you apply it to your specific situation, and the community helps you stay accountable and encouraged as you take the right steps to improve the ministry God has called you to. Get access to over a dozen practical courses, 20 time-saving templates, done-for-you team discipleship material, and live expert interviews with guests like Matt Redman, Christian Stanfill, Charity Gale, and others. The best part is it's completely free to try for 15 days, yes, free. And if you decide to sign up, the Academy is by far the most affordable online worship school that there is out there. Join thousands of other worship leaders like Alicia and Jaime, who both say the Academy has completely transformed their ministry. I hope you'll start your free trial today, take the guesswork out of building a thriving worship ministry, and get a proven game plan to success. Go to worshipministrytraining.com and click that big red button, and I hope to see you inside the Academy this week. How did you find these people? How did you identify these people?
Well, one, I read The Ideal Team Player. If you haven't read that, go read that book, Patrick Lencioni. Did I need people who were humble, hungry, and smart? Those are the type of people that I needed. But I figured out what I needed people who are faithful to the ministry. Do they show up consistently? Are they dependable? I think that's really, really important. And I'm also looking for teachability. This is a big one, I think, for me, is I used to not be teachable. That was a really, really big one for me was, are you willing to learn? Are you willing to grow? And are you willing to be corrected? Can I have a correction conversation with you and you not freak out and it just be what it needs to be? And do they take initiative, right? Faithfulness, teachability, and do they take initiative? Do they solve problems? Do they take ownership without being asked? And I think a little fourth one, I think, is influence. How to identify people? Faithfulness, teachability, initiative, and influence with the team specifically. Are volunteers just naturally following them? Are they already stepping up without a title? My music director, he has such good rapport with every single person on our team. I'm like, okay, this is a guy I need to get on the bus. Like Jim Collins said, like I need to get him on the bus immediately. So those are the things that I looked for when I started to identify them.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about a worship leader listening, and they're like, Mike, I don't really have anybody on the team who has those qualities at least fully developed. So what would you say to that leader? Let's just pretend there's a team that's like 4 or 5 people, and they're like 60-year-olds and 14-year-olds, everything in between. Some of them are busy and they have families, some of them don't have time. Who would you focus on in that group?
I would probably look for someone who is teachable because most of the time, if they're teachable, they're probably going to be able to take initiative or want to take initiative. And then also, they're probably on time. If they're teachable and you've corrected and you've said, hey, I need you to not be late. Hey, I need you to not be this. Like they're usually going to be on time and they're going to be consistent. So I would look for someone who is teachable, first of all. That's the first thing.
Mike, how do you foster a deeper commitment from these people when you're asking so much from them? Like your MD does all the stuff that you should be doing, technically speaking, according to your job description. So,
Right.
how do you find somebody that committed? And I've had in the past people that I've tried to train to do something, but they don't do it consistently or they forget XYZ. So, how did you foster that commitment?
I think the first thing is you got to set clear expectations, right? You've got to set clear expectations. That job role that Alex is going to give you, they've got to understand what they're getting into. And you got to hold them to those expectations. Commitment, spiritual growth, they all matter. And setting those expectations is huge. Another thing is that I'm looking for quality, not quantity. And so I'm not making it too easy for people. So if there's no buy-in, people will flake out. This is a mistake I made a long time ago. I think I just put someone in a role because I didn't want to hurt their feelings. I had a pretty small team and there was a few people that they were friends with. And I was like, oh, I could throw this guy into this. Well, I never set clear expectations. I threw him in and I made it way too easy. He started coming to the meetings. He's not contributing anything. He's not doing anything I've asked him to do. And I'm now requiring a process, right? I'm not throwing someone on a leadership team that's only been in my church for 2 months. I'm making sure that there's a process and I'm not going to make it too easy because I want there to be buy-in. And I think the other thing is building the team culture where people feel valued, connected, challenged. If you have a relationship with these people, if you have a relationship with your leadership team, they will grow, you will grow, and they will be committed. And I think the other thing is give real responsibility. Give real responsibility. People rise to the level of ownership that they're given. I'll say that again. People rise to the level of ownership that they are given. Give them not just tasks, but when it's time, give them ownership and relinquish that control. I think that's how you can foster the deep commitment from people.
So you're basically saying call them to more and then tell them that you trust them. Like when they come to you and they're like, hey, I'm thinking about this or that, then you say, I trust you to make the right decision. I'm happy to weigh in, but I trust you. Because now they're like, oh, wow. Oh, he's really giving this over to me. I better own it. So part of the owning, letting them own it and be responsible is that you stop owning it, right? Is that what I'm
Yep,
hearing? Is like, if they
absolutely.
feel like your hands are still in their pie, then they won't feel the weight of the responsibility because they know that you'll just pick it up if they drop it. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm keeping the hand out of the cookie jar, trying to let them just run with it. And when they make mistakes, which they will, I'll correct them. I would rather you do something, make a mistake, and I'll correct it than not do anything at all. And that's hard for some people. I have someone on my leadership team that wants to know exactly what I think and they want to know exactly how to do it. And I'm like, what do you think? What is it that you think? And they're like, well, I think this. And I said, that sounds great. Run with that. So, yes, keeping my hand, like you said, out of the pie and letting them actually have some ownership, have decision making power, and making sure that they understand that I do trust them.
Yeah, there are a few questions here in the chat about burnout, right? So, like,
Mm.
both Alicia and Sunny are like, hey, I don't want to burn out these people who are already so busy. They have so much on their plates. They're barely doing the normal stuff I'm asking them to do. Like, how could I ask for more? So, yeah, how do we avoid burning out these volunteers as we raise them up?
Well, burnout comes when people don't feel valued, cared for, connected, challenged, when they feel like they're just. I've heard a lot from team members, well, I'm just a name on a schedule. That's when the burnout happens. Now, there are times when there is too much. I had someone who I very much value, and I was asking them to do during COVID, like a lot of extra things, and they were a volunteer. And he came to me and he said, hey, I'm struggling to get these tasks done. And we modified and we changed our plan. And it actually became a better plan. I think, too, one of the things I learned in banking, actually, when I used to be a banker, is I would sell these credit cards to people. And I would always just say no for people. I would just say no. Be like, oh, no, they can't. No, they've got too much on their plate. Oh, they've got too much on their schedule. Oh, they've got too much. Oh, I'm just literally saying no. Oh, well, they don't have this in their banking, like whatever it was. And then come to find out, my MD is one of the busiest people I know. He's like very heavily involved in a construction company. He's a foreman. He has 2 kids. His kids have soccer and baseball and all of these things. And yet he's one of the most committed volunteers there is. So don't say no for people. Ask them.
Yeah, and they might find their purpose in that task that you're asking them to do. So the task does kind of have to match their personality. Would you say that's true, Mike?
Yes. However, I do think roles can be taught. Like music director role, there are attributes of the role that I had to teach him. He knew nothing about computers. So there are attributes of the role that you can teach people, but it does have to match their personality. Like you can't throw someone on an MD who doesn't know anything about music.
Yeah, like Anna said, do you think it's more about calling out giftings rather than piling on tasks? Maybe that's a good way to think about it. I think that's really wise, Anna. Yeah, that's for sure. I do want to break everybody's brain here for a second and show this really crazy org chart that Mike has. I'm not sure how visible everything is here, but I'll kind of read it. It's worship pastor, and he has an admin. And then there's a campus worship director over here on the left, and then a development pastor over here on the right. And underneath the campus worship director, there's a vocal director who then has worship vocal leaders. There's a few vocal leaders under the vocal director. The campus worship pastor is also over the music director who has band leaders, admin help, software help. So this org chart is something that Mike developed. It's kind of mind-boggling, but it's his ideal leadership structure for his ministry. And I'll make sure all this is posted in the academy here soon. But Mike doesn't have somebody in every single one of these positions yet, but it's an org chart to aim towards. Like if I had my ideal worship ministry, who would be doing what? And once you kind of lay it out, you can see like I would need a training system and a training team and a training person and somebody over all the event planning, and maybe they have an assistant. Like if you could lay out like your dream big ministry, having this all laid out is pretty helpful. And then he can begin to like recruit and find people with the natural giftings to fit into some of those slots. Like, hey, you're really administrative. I'll train you how to do my planning center scheduling. Would you be willing to do that for me? Or, hey, you are very detail oriented. Would you be the one to create the chord charts for us? I'll create a video showing you how to do it. And every Monday, could you commit to doing an hour, and just kind of start to fill people into this role here, this org chart role here. So
I don't have all those roles filled. Okay. I used to have a development pastor. I don't anymore, but I still have those roles underneath that person. And so I want people to understand like this is not an exact science to this at all. Leadership is messy, people are messy. And so don't be intimidated by that. That's my like ideal leadership structure that I want to see in my ministry. And I think it's really important to build the infrastructure, because if you don't build the infrastructure, then you don't know what to shoot for. You don't know what to strive for. And so to understand that, okay, so if I've got someone who I want to do team events and I want to do them quarterly, well, that's a lot of work on you. Maybe I can find someone, maybe a little old lady in our church who's not even a part of the worship team. It doesn't always have to be, oh, we recruited them for the worship team. How about we find someone who loves doing events in our church and say, hey, would you mind helping us with an event quarterly for our team? We're going to do a barbecue. We're going to do a chili cook-off. We're going to do like whatever those things are. And so I think we get locked into, well, they didn't sign up for my team, so I guess I can't use them. Well, I heard Susie over here, who's 75 years old, loves to cook. Let's bring her on to help on our events and things like that. So thinking outside the box a little bit.
Yeah, that's really good. Thinking beyond just the musicians on your team. You're actually creating a team that's bigger than just musicians. Talk to us about your circle, your like pastoral care group type leaders. What does that look like?
I call that my circle. And basically, what it is I have identified and asked 12 right now leaders to come alongside me and help shepherd and pastor our team. There are about 75 on our team, and I cannot pastor and shepherd every single one. And so I have started raising up these my circle leaders. I meet with them quarterly, and each person has 4 to 5 people who they are reaching out to weekly, whether that be on a Sunday. Maybe they see them on a Sunday in passing. Maybe they take them out to lunch. Maybe they for coffee. Maybe they send them an encouraging text. There's all different ways to reach them. But these 12 people have 4 to 5 people, some 3, some 6, some 7, and basically help me do the shepherding. It's not that I don't want to do the shepherding, but I've now got to shepherd those 12 people. And I'm looking for a development pastor to help me shepherd those 12 people so that I can shepherd the 5 to 6 of my leadership team. But I shepherd right now all of those people on my team, and they shepherd the volunteers underneath them. So that's kind of how it works.
And are all of those people on your worship team, or are they also outside of the musical sphere?
All of them are on either worship, creative, or production. So I have a new guy. He was a Salvation Army pastor for 50 years. And he just came to our church probably about a year ago. And him and his wife loved it. He signed up for production. And I've met with him, talked with him. He was in a life group with me. And I'm like, man, this guy should be shepherding people. And so yes and no, not everyone is in the worship, but they are all within the circumference of the departments that I lead. Yes.
Yeah. And there's another interview I did recently, guys, where the guy, he calls it distributed care, where he has leaders on his team who care for his worship team. And the leaders of his distributed care team are not even musical. So like Mike said earlier about the event coordinator, they don't even have to be musical. If they have a shepherd's heart, you can bring them into your community and be like, will you, care and shepherd? We're just trying to give you ideas for, you don't have to do it all yourself. You don't have to meet with every team member yourself. Yes, it would be nice, but if you're too busy, why don't you raise up others who can help carry the load? Just like Jethro told Moses, like, dude, you're going to die. Like, you are going to die if you do not raise up leaders who have the Spirit of God and who can do what you do. So I'm hoping that you guys are starting to see a pathway through, like, okay, one day I can breathe. So Mike, as you brought on probably one person at a time, you probably didn't have this whole thing fleshed out when you first started. So even if they just start with one helper, how did you provide training to that helper and feedback?
One, like just shadowing and mentorship. When I first started this, I had one person and I said, hey, would you mind coming in Thursday when he was off? Would you mind coming in for a couple hours? I would love to meet with you. I would love to basically, we just got to know each other, became really, really good friends. And then I started giving him tasks and I started discipling him as well. And so shadowing, mentorship, I think role specific training. So making sure that as I got to a point with, his name was Steven, as I got to a point with him, I then started to train him in a role that I thought he would flourish at. And so I had role specific training, like hands-on coaching for the skills that he already had that I was just trying to develop. As far as training goes, I'm always doing leadership intensives with my people, feedback, coaching meetings, quarterly meetings with the leadership team, written guides, video tutorials, all of those sort of things. And then I ask people to learn on their own time as well. I'll provide them a training and I ask them to go home and watch it and then report back to me.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something very important that I think is worth highlighting, which is you said, I gave this guy, Steven, a task and saw if he was diligent to do it. And then I gave him more tasks and then more tasks. And then pretty soon you're like, okay, this guy is faithful. Like the Apostle Paul says, do not be, this is in terms of elders and deacons, do not be hasty to lay on hands, but really examine the person. And I think a great way to test if someone is going to be faithful, it's like the whole parable of Jesus. He who is faithful with little will be entrusted with more or much. Same thing with the people that are on our team. It's like, hey, would you be interested in handling this one little task once a month or once a week? And you see if they're faithful with it. And then you're like, hey, you're doing great at this. And you can provide feedback as they're doing it. And then would you be willing to try this as well? And see if they respond and blossom and open up more and more to more and more responsibility. But if they fail and they don't do it, then it's a coaching moment. And if they respond well to the coaching moment, then you get another chance. But if they don't, then you probably want to back away from that person. So I think that's a really good.
Responsibility before titles, right? Responsibility before titles. And
Yeah, go
that's
ahead and
exactly
explain
it.
that.
So giving somebody like a responsibility, a task, something for them to do. But for instance, with the person I was mentoring, hey, would you mind? You're a really great vocalist. He had a master's degree in vocal performance. I say, would you mind listening to this song that we're going to do? Would you mind putting the parts in, the recorded parts into Planning Center? Would that be something you could do? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's talk about it. We'll meet next Thursday. He came in every Thursday for 2 years. So we'll meet next Thursday and then we'll go over those. Okay, fantastic. Well, he did that. And then I gave him another thing and another thing and another thing. Next thing I know, he's my vocal director. He's the one who knows the parts. He's the one who knows these things inside and out. And then I said, hey, what do you think about maybe coming alongside of me and really being under my leadership for my leadership team? He's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I would love that. Well, what's that look like? So I started telling him about our monthly meetings and what I'm going to be doing and again, the responsibilities for it. And then I had a job role for him. I actually had a physical written out job role for him to do that. And then the next thing was like, hey, after this 6 months, 7 months, whatever it was of this, hey, I need you to start raising up other people below you, other vocal directors, other vocal leaders. So it was just like this domino effect of just starting with a simple conversation of, hey, I'm going to give you this responsibility. There is no title with this. Once they meet that expectation and meet another expectation, then I can start to bestow and say, hey, here's the keys.
Yeah, and I think that's so key because the title, if you're like, you are going to be this, and you tell your whole team, hey, everybody, Johnny's going to be our vocal director, and then he turns out to be a doofus, then you got to like pull the plug in front of everybody as well. Whereas you just let them earn their title instead of giving them their title. The other thing that I think is really important is one of the reasons why these people aren't burning out and why they feel motivated is because Mike is actually investing in them in terms of their leadership and growth. So he's meeting with them every month. They're going through a book together. Mike is pouring into them. So the return that they're getting from their serving is actually a benefit to them. Like they're becoming better humans and better leaders. And so they are actually benefiting from being part of this leadership team. They're not just pouring out, they're actually being poured into. It's improving their life in probably every sphere. And, Mike, you're going through books with them and other things like that. So Sonny's asking, what are some of the books you would recommend to read with your leaders? Give us like two of your top.
I like study books. I like books where there's questions. So there's a book called The Real Life Discipleship. It's called Real Life Discipleship. There's an actual book, but there's also a workbook, and it's 12 weeks. And I took my whole leadership team and I had them meet me every Saturday morning for 12 weeks and had them do that Real Life Discipleship book together. And then what I asked them to do is then they took more people on the team through it. And basically, it was like a ripple effect. So now everybody on the team has gone through it. So that one. And then I have gone through Ideal Team Player with the team as well.
Yeah. So leadership type books. I want to share my screen and show the job description that Mike has for like his music director. There's actually 2 pages of notes here, and they sign it on the bottom. The pastor signs it, and it's a pretty robust job description. I have worship leader and music director job description templates for you guys in the academy that I'll make sure I post below this video. And we'll also post all of Mike's resources for you here if you want to dig through them more deeply here in the academy. So I'll post that right below this video. But yeah, the clarity, like you said, and we've talked a little bit about training. Maybe tell us a little bit more of what you're doing, Mike, in terms of developing your leaders. So you're going through a book with them. You've got a monthly meeting with them. Are there other rhythms and systems in place to develop your leadership team?
I think the best thing that I have done is I just check in weekly. It sounds so simple, but even a text or a phone call, like I missed a phone call from my MD because he wanted to chat about something. That's one of the most effective things that you can do, because I think people value that you're giving them your time, and they know how busy I am. They know that, my workload has tripled in the last, year or so. And to understand that really what I'm doing is just investing into them with my time. And I don't ask them of anything. Hey, what's going on? What's going on with your fiance? Hey, what's going on? How's things at home? How's the family? And those are the kind of conversations we have. And then it automatically, MD, it turns into music conversation. But that's one of the things I think you could start really super simple. If you got someone in your eye, just get to know them. I know it sounds so simple, but it is so simple. Is just having conversations with people.
Yeah. Every Tuesday night, my kids and my wife go to the church because there's a kids program that my junior high daughter volunteers with, and my youngest daughter is in it, and my wife is in the nursery, and I'm at home alone. And so I get on the elliptical for an hour and 20 minutes, and I call my music director, and we just talk. We talk about his fiance. It seems like all the music directors are like engaged or whatever it is, but his fiance, his situation, how he's doing, how he's feeling about things. And then we start to talk about ministry stuff and people on the team, but having that weekly check-in every week. Mike, what are some things that you feel like we didn't cover? I'm sure there's a lot actually that could be said about this, but in terms of first time considering this idea, I will also say this too, as you think about how to answer that. Guys, it takes upfront work. It might even cost you more time to raise someone up, but then it's going to free up that time. So it's like you do the upfront time investment and get somebody up and running after a few months, and then it's going to more and more give time back to you and take more off your plate. And so it is an upfront investment for a long-term return. And the more you can do it, eventually you've delegated quite a bit of responsibility. So at least think of it in those terms. It might be more stressful for a season, but in the long term, it will pay off. But Mike, what else do you feel like we haven't covered? And then we'll ask you for some first steps that people can take to begin this process.
Well, I do want to encourage people that what you just said is super important. I've worked really, really hard in the last 12 years, meetings, leadership nights, to raising people up, Saturday mornings, to really try to develop leaders, but it has paid off. I'm not saying it's going to take 12 years. It didn't take 12 years, but it is an investment. But if you invest, you will definitely you'll get a big bang for your buck. But I think leadership is more than delegation or even empowerment. It's about discipleship. That's really what we've discussed here today. It's about people. And developing leaders isn't just about getting things done. It's about raising up people who are growing spiritually, leading with integrity, and multiplying their impact, essentially. And so that's what I want to leave you with, the last piece of this, understanding that, hey, it is an investment, it is time, but it's worth it. And discipleship is hard. When you get to see, there's somebody who's on our team that just got baptized for the first time on Sunday. And I've been really pouring into him for about a year now. And to see that, it's worth every single hour that we've spent together. So that's what it's all about.
Yeah, the impact you're making on these people's lives as you're giving them authority and letting them step into their calling and discover their gifts is like tremendous impact and life-changing for them. First steps. I think one of the things that we can do when we hear someone who's 12 years ahead of us and we can feel really overwhelmed and paralyzed and like, I don't even know where to start. So first steps, I'm going to throw out a few. You can throw out a few too. Number one,
Mhm.
identify someone on your team that you believe has that coachable, diligent spirit. Diligence is like one of my like top qualities in a person. Coachable, diligent spirit. Who is that one person that you can begin to like take under your wing? The second thing I would start to do is be like, what are some of the tasks I can get off my plate? And I'm going to just share my screen with you and show you something a little bit personal. I've been feeling overwhelmed with worship ministry training as it's grown. So what I did is I wrote down every single task I do for worship ministry training in a gigantic list of just like every category, every topic. And then I like highlighted like what are the different types of content and how can I automate or delegate some of these tasks? And maybe I can hire someone to help me with some of these tasks. So what I'm saying is do a brain dump of literally everything you do in the week or in the month and just like put it down on paper and then start to highlight some of the stuff that you're like, you know what? I think I can get rid of some of this responsibility. Like, do I have to be the one to do blank? And I really want you to challenge your assumptions and think, do I have to be the one to whatever the question is? And then really like go hard after like finding people who are good at those things who would be happy to help you with that. And I think it's important to say they don't even have to be musical. It could be people in your church, an old lady who's literally, she's like lonely at home. She doesn't have anything to do. Her kids don't call her enough. And she would be thrilled to learn how to do XYZ for you. So yeah, I think doing a brain dump would be probably my second step after kind of identifying who's diligent and coachable. What would you say for first steps for people who are ready to kind of begin raising up people around them?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. The first is identify the potential leaders, like you said, diligent. Who are the teachable ones? Who are the ones that are showing? I think you can look at faithfulness first, and just say who's showing faithfulness and who's showing initiative, and just ask to meet. Just be like, hey, is there any way we can meet? Also, I think it's important. I think I said this in the last call that we had, but understanding that you've got to have a vision for this, so you can't identify people and not and have a vision. Like you can't be like, hey, can we meet? And you're like, what about? And you're like, I don't know, maybe some leadership stuff. Like, no, you've got to have a vision of, yourself. And then I think what you just said, one of the things I did is I looked at my worship pastor job description that my pastor gave me when I was hired. And I ripped that thing apart like a cake. And I started pulling all the ingredients out and I put them on a whiteboard. And if it said planning center, so, in charge of sending and creating planning center. Okay, well, that's one thing, but there's a lot of things within those things. And so then I wrote planning center on my board. And then I started, okay, so what do I do with planning center? Well, planning center, I have to send out songs. I have to choose the songs. I've got to make sure vocal parts in. I've got to make sure there's MD notes. I've got to make sure that all of these things and trying to figure out ripping that job description apart. And then I think once you find somebody, have a meeting with that person. Once you've identified that person, have a quick powwow to see where they're at, to see if they're available to even be able to help with the things that you're asking them to do. Most people I've found want more leadership. They want more leadership teaching. They want more leadership coaching. And they want to be able to help you in the ministry because they feel called to it.
That's good. Well, guys, we are going to jump into a Zoom call. This is something we haven't really done after an interview like this, but I just think, there's enough of you watching live that I think it'd be fun to kind of get your questions live. And so we're going to hop over to the Academy right underneath where this video was posted in the live events tab. Just click the Zoom link. I posted it already, and we'll meet you there in like 3 minutes, and we'll have a little bit of time together digging into your specific questions on this. And for anyone who's watching after the fact, we would encourage you to join us inside the Academy where you can get this in-depth coaching. And we're going to do some coaching on the fly here in Zoom. So join us. It's free to try for 15 days. And we would love to have you be a part of our awesome community of incredible worship leaders from all over the world. So God bless you guys. All right, guys, see you in Zoom, and we'll spend a little bit of time together. See ya. If you're feeling stuck, mediocre, or inadequate in your ministry, if you know there must be a better way of doing things, but you're not sure how, if you're looking for fresh inspiration and new ideas that will improve your ministry and give you a team that you're proud of leading, then I invite you to join me and over 1,400 worship leaders from all over the world who are growing inside the Worship Ministry Training Academy. In the Academy, you'll find over a dozen practical courses that will give you the confidence and skill that you need to lead with excellence. Our 20 done-for-you admin systems will save you time, streamline your ministry, and reduce the weekly stress, headaches, and chaos of leading a team. I'm talking about things like a completely done-for-you audition process and 20 other time-saving tools just as useful as that. During our weekly Monday huddles, you'll gain perspective and encouragement on the actual problems you're facing in your ministry. You'll also hear from some of your favorite worship leaders right inside the Academy. Past guests include Matt Redman, Phil Wickham, Christian Stanfield, Charity Gale, and many others. Our team devotions will help your team grow spiritually, and our musician training resources will help them improve musically. The best part is it's completely free to try for 15 days. Yes, free. And if you decide to sign up, the Academy is by far the most affordable online worship school out there. Our C3 format is proven to get you results because you get courses, coaching, and community. The courses teach you what to do, the coaches help you apply it to your specific situation, and the community helps you stay accountable and encouraged as you take the right steps to improve the ministry God has called you to. Join thousands of other worship leaders like Alicia and Jaime, who both say the Academy has completely transformed their ministry. I hope you'll start your free trial today, take the guesswork out of building a thriving worship ministry, go to worshipministrytraining.com and click that big red button, and I hope to see you this week inside the Academy.